Most red flags are not random behaviors. They are defense mechanisms, ways people protect themselves from fear, shame, or vulnerability. Some relationships don't break your heart. They slowly teach you to live with less honesty, less safety, less of yourself. It rarely starts in an obvious way. There is no clear warning sign, no moment where you immediately know something is wrong. Instead, it begins with small adjustments. You explain things more carefully. You bring things up less often. You tell yourself it's not worth the emotional effort. The relationship still looks functional from the outside. There are good moments. There is connection. There is affection. But internally, something feels off. You feel like you're constantly managing the relationship instead of inhabiting it. You're aware of what not to say, what not to ask, what not to expect. And over time, that internal tension becomes normal. What most people don't realize is that these experiences are not random. They follow predictable psychological patterns rooted in emotional survival, attachment, and self-protection. And once you see them clearly, they stop feeling confusing. Avoiding conversations about the relationship status. You try to talk about the relationship, not a fight, just a check-in. You ask how things are going. You mention something that feels unresolved. You want clarity. The response is vague. They change the subject. They say everything is fine, or they imply you're overthinking it. A real-life example looks like this. You say, "I feel like we haven't been as connected lately." They respond with, "Why do you always make things serious?" Psychologically, this behavior is rooted in emotional avoidance. Talking about the relationship requires vulnerability and accountability. For people who associate emotional conversations with conflict, rejection, or shame, avoidance feels safer than engagement. Silence becomes a coping strategy. But relationships don't improve in silence. They deteriorate quietly. Emotional withdrawal. At first, the connection feels present. Then it slowly thins. They share less, ask fewer questions, seem distracted or emotionally tired. You might hear phrases like, "I'm just exhausted. I don't have the energy for this right now." A small example, you tell them something meaningful about your day. They nod but don't follow up. The conversation ends there. Psychologically, emotional withdrawal is often a nervous system response. For people who feel overwhelmed by intimacy, closeness triggers internal stress. Pulling away helps them regulate themselves. But for the partner on the receiving end, it creates emotional loneliness inside the relationship. Detachment usually begins long before the relationship ends. Repeated boundary violations. You clearly state a boundary. You explain why it matters. You expect it to be respected, but it keeps happening. Pressure to move faster, pressure to change your appearance, pressure to compromise things that matter to you. A real-life example. You say you're not ready to move in together. They bring it up again and again, not aggressively, but persistently. Psychologically, repeated boundary violations often stem from entitlement or control. Boundaries remind someone that you are separate, autonomous, and not available for shaping. For people who feel safest when they feel in control, boundaries feel threatening, so they are tested again and again. Over time, you begin questioning whether your limits are too much. Passive aggression and contempt disguised as jokes. The disrespect doesn't always come directly. Sometimes it comes with a smile, a comment about your looks, your intelligence, your background. When you react, they say they were joking. A small example. They make a remark about your appearance in front of others. Later, when you bring it up, they say you're too sensitive. Psychologically, this is passive aggression rooted in contempt. Contempt forms when resentment exists without self-awareness. It allows someone to feel superior without openly confronting their feelings. Humor becomes a shield, and over time, it erodes respect and emotional safety. Gaslighting and emotional manipulation. You finally address something directly. You explain how it made you feel. Suddenly, the conversation turns. Your tone is questioned. Your memory is challenged. Your feelings are dismissed. A real-life example. You say, "That comment hurt me." They respond, "You're imagining things. That's not what happened." Psychologically, gaslighting protects a fragile sense of self. Admitting fault feels too threatening, so reality itself becomes flexible. The result is confusion. You leave conversations doubting yourself instead of feeling supported. Without emotional safety, intimacy cannot survive. Lack of accountability for past relationships. You hear the stories about their exes. Every one of them was crazy. Every breakup was unfair. There is no reflection, no curiosity, no ownership. A small example. You ask, "What do you think went wrong in that relationship?" They answer, "She was the problem." Psychologically, this behavior is driven by shame avoidance. Blame becomes a defense mechanism, but unexamined patterns repeat, and eventually you find yourself being described the same way. Insecurity or misogyny towards strong women. You notice subtle discomfort when you succeed, when you're confident, when you take up space. The energy shifts. A real-life example. You share a professional achievement. They minimize it or joke about it. Psychologically, this stems from identity threat. When self-worth is built on comparison or dominance, your strength feels destabilizing, so it has to be reduced. Not always openly, but consistently. Over time, respect is replaced by resentment. None of these behaviors appear overnight. They are not random flaws. They are defense mechanisms, ways people protect themselves emotionally, often at someone else's expense. Understanding this isn't about blame, it's about clarity. Many relationships don't end because love disappears. They end because one person has been abandoning themselves quietly for too long. The question is no longer, why do I keep meeting people like this? It becomes, what inside me keeps tolerating it? If this resonated, notice which pattern felt familiar. You don't have to explain it, just acknowledge it.
Comment below which pattern stood out to you, and when do you remember first learning it? Sometimes naming it is the first interruption.